I never thought that a simple morning call would change my life forever. It was Friday. I had just made myself a coffee when the phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen, but I decided to answer anyway. "Hello?" I said, holding the phone with one hand and stirring the coffee with the other. "Tom, this is Sheriff Williams. Do you know Kevin Parker?" "Yes, he is my neighbor. Is something wrong?" "Kevin is missing. We found his house unlocked and there were signs of a struggle. Can you come into our office for a few questions?" My heart started beating faster. Kevin was my childhood friend. We grew up together on this street, and the thought that something could happen to him seemed unbelievable. "Of course, I'll come now," I answered, and quickly started packing. On the way to the ward, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. What could have happened to Kevin? Why did he disappear without a trace? I hoped it was just a misunderstanding, but deep down I felt it was just the beginning of something terrible. I arrived at the station where Sheriff Williams met me. His face was gloomy, and his eyes reflected anxiety. "Tom, come in," he said, leading me to his office. "Sit down, please." I sat down on the chair and felt the tension begin to rise inside me. "What happened to Kevin?" I asked, trying to hide my concern. "We don't know for sure yet," the sheriff answered, sitting down across from me. "But there are some strange circumstances. We found signs of a struggle in his house. And also, this." He pulled out a photo from the drawer and placed it in front of me. I looked at the photo and felt a chill run down my skin. It depicted a symbol carved on a wooden surface, a circle with a crossed-out cross in the middle. I couldn't believe my eyes. "It's the Jack the Ripper symbol," I whispered, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Jack the Hunter was a serial killer who terrorized our town 10 years ago. He was never caught. "Yes," the sheriff confirmed, "but we thought he had disappeared or died. No one had heard from him in years." "Do you think it's him?" I asked, trying to understand how this could be possible. "We can't be sure," the sheriff replied, "but we must be ready for anything. You must be careful, Tom. If it really is Jack the Hunter, no one can be safe." I was overcome with fear. I felt panic begin to rise inside me. Jack the Hunter was a monster that fed on fear and pain. And now he's back. But why? Why now? I returned home but could not find peace. Every sound, every shadow seemed like a threat. I knew I had to find out the truth. I could not afford to sit and wait for the horror to cover us again. I had to find Kevin and stop Jack the Ripper before it was too late. When I returned home, it was already dark. The night always had the ability to heighten fears, and this time was no different. All of Kevin's pictures suddenly took on new meaning, and I felt like the shadows were coming to life. I locked the door with all the locks and sat down on the sofa with my head in my hands. There was a photo of Jack the Ripper in front of my eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My hands were shaking and my heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. Suddenly, there was a knock on the window. I jumped, not sure if it was reality or my imagination. They knocked again, this time harder. I slowly walked to the window and cautiously peered through the blinds. No one. I had already thought it was just the wind when I heard the knock again. It came from the backyard. I took the flashlight and went outside, trying to hold myself in my hands. The darkness seemed even thicker, and every rustle made my heart clench with terror. "Kevin!" I called, although I knew that it was unlikely. There was no answer. I illuminated every corner of the yard with a flashlight, but found nothing. Then I noticed it. Footprints on the ground leading to the woods behind my house. They were fresh and looked as if someone had just passed through. I returned to the house, locked the door, and went up to the bedroom. The forest has always been a source of fear for me. My grandfather used to tell scary stories about beasts living there that hunt people. But now it was not a fairy tale, but a reality that became part of my life. I lay in bed, but sleep did not come. Every sound seemed to me a threat, every shadow an enemy. I could feel fear starting to control me, making me helpless against the horror that was rolling in. Suddenly, I heard a call. The cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. I picked it up and saw that Sheriff Williams was calling. "Tom, we found something at Kevin's house. You need to come right away," he said quickly. I felt my heart begin to beat even harder. What did they find? And why was the sheriff so insistent that I come? I quickly got dressed and left for the night. The road was empty and eerie. Every kilometer seemed like an eternity. I was scared, but I knew I had to find out the truth. Whatever it was, I had to face my fear. The road to the branch was empty, and the night seemed endless. The headlights of the car cut through the darkness, but even the bright light could not drive away the shadow of fear that haunted me. My thoughts were focused on one thing. What was found in Kevin's house that Sheriff Williams called me in the middle of the night? When I arrived, the sheriff was waiting for me at the entrance. His face was even more gloomy than before, and I could see anxiety in his eyes. "Tom, come in," he said, leading me to one of the offices. There was a box on the table sealed with a red ribbon. The sheriff carefully removed the lid, and my heart stopped for a moment when I saw what was inside. It was an old, battered diary. I recognized it immediately. It was Jack the Hunter's diary, the same one that disappeared with him years ago. "We found it in Kevin's basement," the sheriff explained. "It seems that he was possessed by this maniac, but the most frightening thing is that there are new entries in the diary." I felt a chill run down my spine. I took the diary in my hands and started turning the pages. The notes were chaotic, written in different handwritings, as if several people were sharing their thoughts. But one handwriting was familiar to me. It was Kevin's handwriting. "Kevin kept this diary?" I asked, feeling my fear grow. "Looks like it," the sheriff replied. "But we don't know why. Maybe he was investigating the Jack the Ripper case on his own. But then why did he disappear?" I kept going through the entries until I came across the last page. It had just a few words written on it. "Has back, has coming for me." Under these words was a symbol, a circle with a crossed-out cross. "Sheriff, that means Jack the Hunter is really back," I said, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "And if he came for Kevin, he might as well come for us." "We have to find him before it's too late," the sheriff said firmly. "Will you help us, Tom? You knew Kevin best. Maybe you can give us some clues." I nodded, though fear still gripped me. I knew I couldn't stand by. If Jack the Ripper came back, I had to do everything I could to stop him, even if it meant that I myself would be his next victim. The next day, I went back to Kevin's house with the sheriff and several officers. The place looked just as I remembered it, but now it was shrouded in even greater anxiety. I felt each step grow heavier, as if the house itself was trying to keep me from revealing its secrets. We entered the basement, where old newspaper clippings and photos related to Jack the Catcher still hung on the walls. It looked like a kind of temple for a maniac. I stopped in front of one of the photos. It was of Kevin, young and carefree before all these horrors. "Kevin has always been obsessed with this thing," I said, my voice shaking. "He could never come to terms with the fact that Jack the Ripper wasn't caught. He believed that the maniac was still out there somewhere, hiding and waiting for his moment." The sheriff nodded, listening intently. "But why now? What could have triggered his return?" I had no answer to that question. All these years, Jack the Huntsman remained a shadow of the past, and now he is back to sow terror again. Perhaps he has always been watching over us, waiting for the moment when we forget about him. "You have to be careful," I said. "Jack the Hunter is no ordinary killer. He is a master at covering his tracks and manipulating his victims." We continued to explore the basement until we found another clue, an old photograph of a place that looked familiar. It was an old motel on the outskirts of town, abandoned and neglected. "This could be where he's hiding," the sheriff said, looking at the photo. "Gotta check it out." We went to the motel, trying not to attract too much attention. The place was creepy, paths overgrown with weeds, broken windows, and doors that creaked from the slightest breath of wind. I felt each step grow heavier, as if the motel itself was trying to shield us from its secrets. "Tom, be careful," said the sheriff, coming in first. I followed him, feeling fear permeate my every move. We searched several rooms, but found nothing. And then I saw it. A Jack the Ripper symbol was carved into one of the walls. "Has here," I whispered, feeling the panic begin to rise inside me. "Has here somewhere, and he's watching over us." The sheriff nodded, gesturing for the officers to continue the search. We had to find him before he found us. But deep down, I knew that this battle would not be easy. Jack the Hunter was a master at what he did, and he wasn't going to give up without a fight. The darkness of the motel seemed endless, and every step seemed like a step toward one's own fear. We had to find him and stop him before it was too late. Darkness engulfed us, and every step in the motel seemed like an eternity. The motel had been abandoned for many years, but it felt as if its walls still held the memory of the terrible events that once happened here. I held the flashlight tighter, trying not to shake with fear. The sheriff and officers moved cautiously from room to room, looking for any clues. My mind kept returning to the symbol carved on the wall. Jack the Huntsman was here, and I could feel his presence pressing down on us like an invisible force. Suddenly, there was something like a whisper in the silence. I froze, listening. The sheriff signaled the officers to stop. "Did you hear that?" whispered one of the officers. I nodded, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The sounds seemed unreal, as if they came from another world. We cautiously moved in the direction where the whispers came from. Every step seemed like a step into the unknown. As we approached the door of one of the rooms, the whispers grew louder. I opened the door to find it dark inside, but my flashlight illuminated a small figure sitting in the corner. It was Kevin. His eyes were wide open, and he looked as if he had seen something so terrible that he could not speak. "Kevin!" I shouted, running up to him. "What happened? Are you okay?" He slowly raised his head and looked at me. His voice was low and trembling. "Tom, he's here. He's watching us." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who? Jack the Hunter?" Kevin nodded, his eyes full of fear. "He's playing with us, Tom. He wants us to find him. He's enjoying our fear." The sheriff and officers approached, trying to figure out what was going on. "We have to get out of here," the sheriff said. "It's a trap." We started to move towards the exit, but suddenly we heard a loud creak. The door closed behind us and we were in the dark. Panic began to rise inside me. We were trapped, and Jack the Trapper was there. "Stay together," the sheriff ordered. "We will find a way out." But deep down I knew it wouldn't be easy. Jack the Hunter was a master at his game, and he would leave us no chance of salvation. We were in his trap, and he was playing with us, enjoying our fear. Darkness engulfed us, and we tried to find our way out of the motel, but all the doors seemed to be locked. Panic gripped each of us, and every sound sounded like a threat. We were like mice in a maze, and Jack the Ripper was a predator hunting us. "Stay together," the sheriff repeated, trying to calm us down. I held Kevin's hand, trying to shake him out of his shock. His eyes were glassy, and he was almost unresponsive to his surroundings. I knew he had been through something terrible, but we needed to move on. Suddenly we heard a loud sound as if someone dropped something heavy on the floor. We all froze, listening. The sound came from another room. The sheriff gestured for the officers to come closer. "We should check it out," he said, and we started moving towards the sound. When we got to the door, the sheriff gently opened it. It was dark inside, but I noticed movement in the corner of the room. I shined my flashlight on it and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was Jack the Ripper. His face was hidden by a mask, but his eyes glowed with madness. "Has here!" shouted one of the officers, and we rushed to the exit. Jack the Hunter rushed after us, his steps quick and determined. We were running around trying to find a way out of this motel, but it looked like all the doors were locked. Panic gripped us, and every sound sounded like a threat. We were trapped, and Jack the Trapper was there. We ran out of the room, but Jack the Hunter was faster. His footsteps came closer and closer, and I could feel fear creeping through my every nerve. We ran down the corridor looking for an exit, but all the doors were closed. The sheriff tried to break down one of the doors, but to no avail. "We must find another way out," I shouted, trying to hold back my panic. We turned the corner and found ourselves in another corridor. It was a little brighter here, but it didn't add to our peace. I looked back and saw that Jack the Hunter was already a few meters away. His eyes glittered in the darkness, and I could feel his gaze piercing through me. "Rather!" shouted the sheriff, pointing to the door at the end of the corridor. We rushed towards them, but suddenly we heard a loud sound, as if someone threw something heavy on the floor. I looked back to see Jack the Hunter throw a knife that almost hit me. "It's a trap!" I shouted, realizing that we were cornered. We stopped, feeling fear grip our every move. Jack the Huntsman came closer and closer, his steps slow but determined. He enjoyed our fear, playing with us like a cat with a mouse. "We must fight," said the sheriff, drawing his gun. "This is our only chance." I felt adrenaline fill my body. We were facing evil, and there was nowhere to retreat. I knew we had to fight for our lives, even if the odds were against us. "He shouldn't win," I whispered, looking at Jack the Ripper. "We will not give him the satisfaction of defeating us." Jack the Hunter smiled under his mask, as if sensing our determination. His eyes shone with madness, and I knew he would stop at nothing to get his way. The sheriff raised his gun and fired. A shot cut through the darkness, but Jack the Hunter was too fast. He dodged a bullet and rushed at us. We scattered in different directions, trying to evade his attacks. I felt something sharp fly past me and fall to the floor. It was Jack the Ripper's knife. He was armed to the teeth, and I knew we had to be careful. The sheriff fired again, trying to hit, but Jack the Huntsman moved like a shadow. His movements were quick and unpredictable, and I knew we had little chance against him. "Tom, look!" shouted the sheriff, pointing to the door at the end of the corridor. They were half open, and this was our only chance of salvation. We rushed to the door, but Jack the Hunter was faster. He jumped up to me and grabbed my hand, feeling his cold fingers squeeze me. I tried to break free, but his grip was too strong. "You will not escape," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. I felt the fear come over me, but I couldn't give up. I mustered all my strength and punched him in the face. He let go of me, and I fell to the floor. "Tom, hurry up!" shouted the sheriff, pulling me off the floor. We rushed to the door and ran outside. The fresh air enveloped us, but we did not stop. We ran without looking back. The motel was gone, but I knew it wasn't the end. Jack the Ripper was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he got his way. "We have to get back to the station," the sheriff said, panting from running. "We must muster all our strength and find him." I nodded, feeling the adrenaline gradually subside. This was only the beginning of our battle. Jack the Hunter was a strong and cunning enemy, and we had to be ready for anything. The darkness gradually dissipated, but the fear remained. We knew that even more terrible tests were ahead of us. But we will not give up. We will fight to the end to stop this maniac and put an end to his terror. Returning to the department, we were on the verge of physical and emotional exhaustion. The sense of danger still gripped our hearts. We knew that Jack the Ripper was around, and we had to be ready for new challenges. The sheriff called an emergency meeting. He laid out a map of the city and its surroundings on the table, marking the places where Jack the Hunter had previously appeared. Our task was to find him and stop him before he strikes again. "We are dealing with a very dangerous enemy," the sheriff said, looking at each of us. "He is a master at covering his tracks and manipulating our fears. We must be alert and ready for anything." We were divided into several groups, each of which had to search a certain area of the city. I was in a group with the sheriff and 2 officers. We went to one of the abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of the city. This place has always seemed creepy to me, and now it's even more menacing. The warehouse was large and dark, filled with old boxes and pieces of furniture. We went inside, holding flashlights and trying not to make any noise. Every step echoed in the empty space, and I felt my heart beat faster and faster. "Stay together," the sheriff whispered, looking around the room. "We don't know what might be waiting for us here." We moved slowly, illuminating every corner. The warehouse seemed empty, but I knew it was just an appearance. Jack the Hunter could be hiding anywhere, waiting for the right moment. Suddenly, we heard a noise like a door creaking. We stopped, listening. The noise came from deep inside the warehouse, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Hez here," whispered one of the officers, holding his gun at the ready. "We have to be careful." We continued in the direction of the noise, trying not to make a sound. Every step felt like a step into the unknown, and I felt the fear creeping over me more and more. We approached the door where the noise was coming from, and the sheriff carefully opened it. It was dark inside, but I noticed movement in the corner of the room. I shined my flashlight on it and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was Jack the Ripper. His eyes glittered in the darkness, and I could feel his gaze piercing through me. He smiled under his mask, as if enjoying our fear. "Did you think you could find me?" His voice was quiet but threatening. "I'm always one step ahead." The sheriff raised his gun, but Jack the Hunter was faster. He rushed at us, and we scattered in different directions, trying to dodge his attacks. I fell to the floor, feeling the cold metal fly past me. It was Jack the Ripper's knife. His movements were quick and precise, and I knew we had little chance against him. "We have to stop him!" shouted the sheriff, trying to aim. I gathered all my strength and rose to my feet. We had to fight even if the odds were against us. I knew that Jack the Ripper would stop at nothing, and we had to be ready for anything. The battle was brutal and merciless. Jack the Hunter moved like a shadow, dodging our attacks and delivering his blows with incredible precision. The sheriff and officers tried to restrain him, but he was too fast and strong. I could feel every punch going through my body, but I couldn't give up. We had to stop him before it was too late. I mustered all my will and rushed at him, trying to wrest the knife from his hands. Our bodies collided, and I felt cold metal pass my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but I didn't back down. We struggled, and I felt each blow bring us closer to the end of this horror. We fell to the floor, and I felt Jack the Hunter trying to break free. I grabbed his arm, feeling his strength begin to weaken. The sheriff ran up to us and fired, hitting the maniac in the leg. Jack the Hunter screamed in pain and fell to the floor. We quickly tied him up, trying to prevent any movement. His eyes still glittered with hatred, but I felt that we had won this battle. "We did it," the sheriff said, panting. "We stopped him." But deep down, I knew that this was only a temporary victory. Jack the Hunter was a master at his craft, and we couldn't be sure he wouldn't find a way to escape. We had to remain alert, ready for new challenges. Jack the Ripper was in custody, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the end. His gaze haunted me even in my dreams, and I knew that this horror would not leave me so easily. One evening, as I was walking home, I felt someone watching me. I looked around, but the street was empty. Darkness covered everything around me, and I felt the fear come over me again. I quickened my pace, trying to push those thoughts away. But the feeling of danger did not disappear. When I reached my house and opened the door, I heard a soft sound, as if someone whispered my name. I froze, looking around, but the house was empty. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead and realized that this horror was not over yet. Jack the Ripper had left his mark on my life, and I knew he would be back. After I locked the door, I tried to calm myself down, but anxiety did not leave me. I turned on all the lights in the house, hoping that the brightness would dispel the shadows of fear. However, it seemed that every corner hides danger. I picked up the phone and called the sheriff. His voice was calm, but I could sense that he was also feeling the tension. "Tom, don't worry. We'll do everything we can to keep Jack the Ripper from escaping," he assured. "But what if he already found a way? What if he's here in my house right now?" My voice trembled. "Stay home and don't open the door to anyone. I'll send a patrol to check the area," the sheriff said. I hung up and tried to calm down, but anxiety did not leave me. I knew that Jack the Hunter was cunning and treacherous, and I could not be sure of my safety. The night passed in tense anticipation. I could not sleep. Every sound seemed threatening. Finally, as dawn broke, I felt a little calmer. I decided to check the mailbox, hoping to find at least some news from the patrol. When I went outside, I noticed that everything was quiet. But when I opened the mailbox, my heart stopped. Inside was an envelope without any markings. With trembling hands, I opened it and saw a photograph. It was me, photographed through the bedroom window where I was sleeping. Under the photo was written, "I'm always there." My fear turned into panic. I ran into the house and locked the door. I realized that Jack the Ripper was still playing with me, and he was close. The day passed in fear and tension. I tried to keep busy, but every sound, every movement outside the window made me shudder. The sheriff's patrol went around the area, but they did not find anything suspicious. In the evening, I decided to stay in one room where all the windows and doors were closed. I took a knife for self-defense from the table and sat in the corner, listening to the silence. Suddenly, a creak was heard. I froze, listening. The screeching repeated, and I realized it was coming from the basement. My heart started beating faster, and I knew I needed to check out what was going on. I went down to the basement, knife in hand. The darkness engulfed me, and I tried not to make a sound. Each step sounded louder than the last, and I felt the fear creeping over me more and more. When I got to the basement, I saw that the door was open. I turned on the flashlight and began to look around the room. It seemed empty, but I felt that someone or something was hiding here. Suddenly, a whisper was heard. I turned my head and saw a shadow moving in the corner of the basement. I raised the knife and approached her. "Who's here?" My voice was trembling. The shadow stopped, and I saw that it was only my reflection in the old mirror. But this moment was enough to understand. Jack the Hunter is playing with me, and he is somewhere nearby. I made my way back to the basement, trying not to make a sound. But when I reached the stairs, suddenly there was a loud crash. I looked back and saw the basement door closing by itself. "No!" I shouted, rushing to the door. But it was too late. The door closed and I was in the dark. I could feel the panic coming over me. I started banging on the door, screaming for help, but there was no answer. I was locked in the basement and Jack the Hunter was somewhere nearby. Hours passed, but no one came to help. I sat in the dark, trying to control my panic. I knew I had to stay calm and find a way out of this trap. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper. He seemed so close, as if someone was standing next to me. I looked up and saw a shadow moving in the darkness. My heart was beating faster, and I could feel the fear take over every cell in my body. "Tom," whispered the voice, "I'm always there." I closed my eyes, trying to distract myself from this nightmare. But the voice did not disappear. It was getting louder and closer, and I realized that it was not just a figment of my mind. I felt something cold touch my hand. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow standing next to me. I gathered all my will and rushed to the door, trying to knock it out. The door gave way and I ran out of the basement. The light seemed so bright after dark, but I didn't stop. I ran without looking back, trying to escape this nightmare. As I reached the street, I felt a cold wind wash over me, but it was better than staying in that darkness. I knew that Jack the Ripper was still around and I had to be ready for new challenges. At dawn, I returned to the police station. The sheriff met me at the door, his face serious. "Tom, are you okay?" he asked. "He's still here, Sheriff," I said, trying to hold back my fear. "He's playing with me." The sheriff nodded, his gaze intense. "Well, find him, Tom. We'll stop him once and for all." But I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Jack the Hunter was a master at what he did, and he wouldn't stop until he got his way. My fear became my constant companion, and I knew that even more terrible trials lay ahead. The days passed in constant tension. The sheriff and other officers and I patrolled the city continuously, checking every suspicious movement. Jack the Huntsman was still at large, and each of us felt that the end of this nightmare was drawing near. One evening, we received information about strange activity in an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. This place has always been creepy, and I knew we had to check it out. I and a few other officers went there, ready for anything. The house was dark and gloomy. We went inside with flashlights at the ready. Each step echoed loudly in the silence, and I could feel the tension building. We split up to search every corner of the house. Suddenly, I heard a noise in the attic. I gathered all my will and went up the stairs. When I reached the attic, I saw a shadow moving in the darkness. My heart sank when I realized it was Jack the Hunter. "You're not getting away this time," I said, trying to stay calm. Jack the Huntsman smiled under his mask. "You think you can stop me?" I raised my gun, aimed at him. "This is the end. Your nightmare will end here." Jack the Hunter lunged at me and I fired. A bullet hit him in the shoulder, but he did not stop. We collided and I felt him try to wrest the gun from my hands. Our bodies collided and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The battle was brutal and merciless. I gathered all my strength, trying to hold the advantage. Finally, I hit him with all my might and he fell to the floor. I walked up to him with my gun at the ready. "This is the end," I said, trying to stay calm. "You won't hurt anyone again." Jack the Huntsman smiled, his eyes sparkling in the darkness. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." I fired again and his body froze. I stood over him, feeling the tension gradually subside, but deep down I knew that this nightmare would stay with me forever. Epilogue: The Shadow of the Past. After we stopped Jack the Ripper, the city gradually returned to normal life, but nothing was the same for me. His words haunted me in my dreams, and I knew that this nightmare had left its mark on my life forever. I stood in the doorway of my house, looking at the quiet street. Everything seemed to fall into place, but I knew that the shadows of the past would never completely disappear. Life went on, and I tried to find peace in the everyday. But every time I heard a strange noise or saw a shadow in the dark, I remembered the horror we had experienced. and I knew that even after Jack the Ripper died, his legacy of fear and terror would stay with me forever. This nightmare is over, but others could start at any moment, and I must be ready to protect myself and those I love. Life goes on, but fear is always there. This content may violate our terms of use. If we've made a mistake, let us know by giving this answer a thumbs down. Several months had passed since the death of Jack the Ripper, but the town was still reeling from the horror he had brought. I tried to return to a normal life, but the fear and shadows of the past did not leave me. Everyone said I was a hero, but I didn't feel like one. Every night was a test. Every unfamiliar sound made me shudder. One day, late at night, I was sitting in my office going through old records. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I got up feeling a little excited. When I opened the door, an unfamiliar woman was standing in front of me, dressed in a dark cloak. "Tom Brown?" she asked in a cold voice. "Yes, it's me. How can I help?" I answered, trying not to show my concern. "My name is Sarah. I'm a journalist and I'm working on an article about Jack the Ripper. I need your help," she said, looking me straight in the eye. I invited her inside and we sat down at the table. She unfolded her notes and began to talk about her work. She found new details about Jack the Trapper's life that could shed light on his motives and methods.